G'day mates, Nate the Aussie here. How you all doing? This is a polite response and debunking video to Anthony Cummins and the videos he is releasing. Now, there are various things that Anthony Cummins does in his approach that I disagree with. I have made that clear in a previous video. But look, he's entitled to have his own opinion on these things. Obviously, this isn't a critique on whether or not he should have an opinion at all, because at the end of the day, free speech. But at the same time, there are things that he says in these videos that he claims are based on the manuals, but when we look at the actual texts that are written, and also his movements from a purely practical perspective in combination with what the manuals are saying, it shows a very strange finishing picture, if you will. So what I'm going to do is I'm not coming at this from a Koryu perspective at all. I'm not a Koryu student. I am coming at this purely from a martial arts perspective, from my own martial arts background, which includes MMA, Krav Maga, IKMF specifically, HJMA, and also historical Japanese martial arts research, which is basically the Japanese variant of HJMA, researching historical texts from specific eras and so on. So we will look at two of his videos that he has on his channel. I will not look at the third one. It's 12 minutes long. There are problems with that, but a lot of that really I don't have time to address. So I'm just going to be addressing this video in an unscripted sort of way. So just going to look at his two videos and we'll break them down bit by bit.
So this is Itto Ryodan.
Okay, so keep in mind that this is Itto Ryodan, all right, from the Heiho Kadensho. Now, specifically, we're going to be using two different translations of this, one by William Scott Wilson and the other by Hiroaki Sato.
And what you do is you offer your shoulder for the enemy to take forward. They take it, you cut their hands off.
Okay, first, let's look at the Hiroaki Sato translation. So it says, as elsewhere, the opponent is depicted at left. You face the opponent sideways, holding your sword on your right downward, the sword tip facing away from you. When the opponent swings his sword down at your left shoulder, swing your sword up and, in a semicircle, the wheel, strike his fists. As you do this, your left shoulder will twist away from its original position and escape the enemy's sword. And because of the low posture you assume, this technique is nicknamed Jinryu, a dragon crouching in the water. Now, there's a few issues with this and the way he's showing it. First things first, in the Hiroaki Sato translation, it mentions striking the hands. It doesn't mention whether the sword is going up and around or down and around. It simply says going around. Now, that can be translated or interpreted either way, so that's fine. However, it doesn't mention whether you step at all with the cut. It simply says by cutting, your left shoulder will move. So when you're looking at the way that I'm doing it, arguably, if you're only using the Hiroaki Sato translation, then you could technically be faithful to the translation by simply doing it the way I'm doing here, which, let's face it, is a really awkward way to do a cut. But what about the William Scott Wilson translation? Well, this is where it gets even more problematic. Here's what it says. When your opponent takes the Chudan stance, aiming the tip of his sword at your eyes, drop your sword back to the right like a wheel, advance your left foot, and cock your left knee slightly. Your body should be at an oblique angle to your opponent. Draw the sword slowly but surely to the front while fixing your eyes. When the hip seems set for an attack and your opponent strikes at your left shoulder, release the fixation of your eyes, drop your fist to your knee, and extend your left elbow with certainty and deflect his blow. So the first strike is actually not a hit to the hands, it's a deflection, according to William Scott Wilson. Moving on though, as he raises his sword to strike, step forward with your right foot, open your stance to the rear, and cut his left wrist.
And what you do is you offer your shoulder for the enemy to take forward. They take it, you cut their hands off.
So the weird thing here is that he seems to be very selective with the translations that he's picking. He seems to only be referring specifically to the Hiroaki Sato translation, maybe, but using completely different wording. So we really don't know exactly what's going on here. Because again, keep in mind, the William Scott Wilson translation specifically mentions an initial deflection first, before then you cut at the opponent's wrists. But, of course, Anthony doesn't mention any of this. He goes straight into the technique as if this is something that he has thought of, without going into any of the methodology behind it whatsoever. Which, in my opinion, is not really the most intellectually honest way to go about this. Now, this is the first issue. Now we go on to the footwork, and this is a whole other debacle.
And what you do is you offer your shoulder for the enemy to take forward.
Okay, memes aside, let's talk about what is going on here in depth. So, there is a distance between you and your opponent. Alright? Now, obviously, the ideal distance you want to start off at is when you are not in your opponent's measure, and vice versa, or not in their range, and vice versa. Because if you both start in each other's range, then it means that they or you do not have to be able to move in order to hit, which means you are purely relying on your own reflexes to defend yourself. It's why you need to start just out of measure, and make sure that if you are crossing that distance, you make sure that you have your sword ready to be able to defend yourself. Now, what Anthony is doing here is he is crossing this distance by performing a passing step while also removing the only thing that's protecting him. Now, the ironic thing is that in this situation, according to the texts, it is mentioned that and is shown that the opponent is in a Chudan no Kamae, which means their sword is pointing forward. So if you're stepping forward with a passing step into their range while taking your own sword back, you're immediately going to be hit. And this is basic common knowledge of any kind of fencing, to be honest, which is why it's bizarre that Anthony's trying to advocate for this. The other ironic thing as well is that Anthony has two different videos on this exact same topic, Itto Ryodan, and he does this strike, this final strike that he does it with a swapping, and he also does it with a passing step. And again, he doesn't explain why. He just does these things without explaining or drawing notice to a difference and explaining why there is a difference in relation to the text. Now, you might respond to this and say, well, it says in the text, at least in the William Scott Wilson translation of the text, that you need to bring your left leg forward, advance your left foot. So surely that means you need to step forward. Well, no, not necessarily. So actually, there's an actually different way you can do this by advancing your left foot while also making sure that you do not step into your opponent's range. And again, this is basic fencing concepts. So if you actually see what I'm doing here, you can actually notice the difference in terms of range when I'm stepping. So when I'm actually stepping forward, I'll put my sword here so you can see. When I'm actually stepping forward, see how much distance I cross in this way, as opposed to just changing my legs.
When you face straight on, they won't realize how close you are. It's an illusion. You go forward.
So, according to Anthony, if you are sparring with someone and you step forward in this way, they won't know you've stepped forward. I personally don't see how that's going to work. That's all I really had to say about the videos that Anthony has put out there on YouTube. And look, obviously, this is just meant to be in a polite discussion format, obviously. We're purely looking at the way that Anthony is looking at the texts and bringing them out there and claiming he's using them and his methodology. We're not trying to critique him as a person or anything like that. This is purely an academic discussion. Now, obviously, you might be asking, okay, well, what's your interpretation of this then, Nate? How would you interpret this technique as it's shown in Itto Ryodan, combining sort of, I suppose, ideas from both translations to create a valid interpretation? Well, this video is actually taken from my Living History group's Instagram page, and feel free to have a look at it and see what you think. Now, if you want me to explain in detail exactly what's going on here and why I interpreted it this way, feel free to ask in the comments. If enough people ask, then I probably will upload a separate video to explain my interpretation. But thank you for watching. I hope you found this an informative video. And again, all the best for everyone out there who is genuinely trying to research this stuff.